So in this video, we'll talk about the death of Alexander and all that that entails. The rule of Alexander, his reign in the East, is relatively short. It's only a few years, and yet it has a profound effect on the history of the world, certainly the history of this part of the world. Alexander, comes into the East and establishes his throne as Babylon as king of Asia. He does so in a way that is not simply about being a foreign conqueror. His purpose in coming to Asia, his purpose in setting up his throne in Babylon, is to achieve a new level of greatness for Babylon, for Mesopotamia, for what had been the Persian Empire, and for Macedon and the Greeks. And his rule is very much about this. He sets about to demonstrate and to show himself as a king of Asia with the larger motive of bringing together everything that Asia has accomplished and everything that he and his people bring with him from the world of the Greeks and the world of Macedon. And so the rituals of his court are a combination of local customs and Macedonian traditions. Some of this is much to the consternation of his closest companions from Macedon. But the larger goal is to ensure that the places that had been part of the Persian Empire want to be continue to be a part of something and to be a part of what Alexander is attempting to accomplish. It's very much focused not just on Alexander personally and his amazing charisma, his ability to instill loyalty and enthusiasm, but on everything that he represents. If it was just based on his charisma and his personal appeal, it would not have survived his death. But the fact is that his project is something that has a great deal to recommend it in terms of short-term and long-term benefits for the peoples that he rules over, and so this is something that involves a great deal of investment. The bonding together of his peoples is done to a certain extent in a literal way. In other words, he oversees the mass marriages of Persian peoples with Macedonian troops, so forth and so on. But in practices and policies, Alexander sets out to establish not just a throne for himself, but something with a much larger goal that survives. The vast empire that he creates, and the short span of space in which he rules over it. His methodology is visible in Egypt as well. He presents himself as Pharaoh of Egypt, not just as a foreign conqueror, not just as a viceroy. He doesn't establish some subordinate as being the head of the Egyptian state. Rather, he insinuates himself into and enthusiastically merges himself into the traditions of Egypt. In other words, Alexander's being about the image allows for a great deal of plasticity and allows for a great deal of his subject peoples, molding, what they want him to be onto the way in which his leadership and rule is executed. There's this is not a simple process, and there's a great deal of friction between the Macedonian guard that has been around him from the beginning, and that has taken all of this on behalf of Alexander, king of Macedon, and the way in which Alexander is looking ahead to successors in a literal in a literal sense, not personally for his rule. He doesn't. He's still very young. He's not anticipating his own death. He's looking for the next generation, and he's looking for that next generation to be a synthesis of the Greek world and the Asian world. And so, the way in which this plays out has a great deal to do with this looking ahead being something that offers possibilities to everyone involved. Unfortunately, Alexander dies unexpectedly, and without leaving a formal plan for the succession. It's hugely debated the extent to which he might have developed one later or might have had something in mind. He might have had in mind what actually happens, which is that his domains are contested from amongst his various generals. But so the story is that one of his generals goes in to meet with Alexander privately, and when he comes out, he is asked what Alexander said about who is to succeed him, and so we get secondhand the story that Alexander said that it is to go to the strongest. This is open to interpretation. It's not necessarily intended to suggest that he meant for there to be a brawl, for there to be an all-out fight to determine who is the strongest. Maybe, there might have been a mutual agreement that one of them was stronger than the others. But the way in which this plays out, even if Alexander said this, and we don't know, later on he would have hoped for his own son to be a successor, but this isn't possible. And the only other member of the royal family was generally recognized as being a half-wit. So the succession needed to go to the generals that Alexander had brought with him, and they ended up fighting amongst themselves, dividing Alexander's conquests and struggling between them for territory between their individual fiefdoms. There's an extent to which people talk about how Alexander's empire didn't succeed. It only lasted for a few years as an empire. Alexander failed, as a conqueror, and this is not really the most useful way of looking at these things. Alexander was hoping to unite the great peoples of mankind, and yes, the most effective way of doing this would be in a single polity. But more to the point, he hoped to synthesize from the great peoples of mankind the ultimate culture. Or at least this would be the ideal result of the conquest in which Alexander was engaged, down to his Greek soul, or Greekified soul. Alexander would have been looking for this to at least be the ultimate outcome of what he had been working toward. And this is what happened to a very large extent, despite the fact that his empire is broken apart into pieces, and these pieces shift and change over the next few decades, and important players emerge and then drop out, and blah blah blah. What we end up with in the East is a Hellenized Southwest Asia and a Hellenized Egypt. The Eastern Mediterranean world, the world of these ancient cultures, is all connected together by the process of introducing them to Greek ways of thinking, Greek approaches to society, to social bonds, to justice, philosophy, art, expression, and in this way, the East is connected together into what in some ways is a cultural whole that opens up possibilities for for thought, for inspiration, for interchange of ideas, for stronger commerce, higher standards of living. This is a new kind of connecting together that is beyond empire. This is what the benefits of the Hellenistic East are. The kinds of things that came from the benefits of a benevolent, prosperous, and successful empire. Except that in this case, no empire is needed, and people are connected together beyond their horizons. The world view of humanity is changed in a entirely new way, and this opens up a new chapter in the history of humanity. The extent to which Alexander intended to do this, that this is something that we should praise him for. The end result is that this is the goal. This is the result. Whatever the goals were, this is the result of what Alexander accomplished in the East. And this is the Hellenistic East that the Romans encounter later on, and the synthesis of those cultures creates the foundation for Western civilization. So we'll look into more detail what we mean by the Hellenistic East in the last videos. For now, that's that.